The evidence question from July of 1997 is a standard transcript format question. We're being called on for objections, and that means we're going to try to come up with as many objections as we can. We will throw in a one-liner on relevance, although the call of the question is asking about objections. We're still going to give them objections. So take a look at the short call of the question, and it says, at each of the 7 indicated points, what objection or objections could reasonably have been made, and how should the court rule? Discuss. Well, I will follow the same format for this question that I follow for all evidence transcript format questions. I'll have a brief sentence or two about relevance, then I'll move on to consider the objections. But the headings will be made up of the objections. Take a look at the top of the fact pattern, and let's review the context out of which all of these issues arise. We've got a criminal case involving one count of cocaine sales. The government witness is Carl Smith, and the theory is that Dave and Carl together sold a lot of drugs, including this sale. Carl has pleaded guilty to a lesser offense and has agreed to testify against Dave. Carl is called as the first witness, and then we get the transcript. So we are sensitive to the possibility of criminal procedure objections arising, but as it turns out, this is a pure evidence problem. As pure as they get, I suppose. Let's skim through the fact pattern. We'll concentrate the bulk of our work on reviewing the outline and the answer. But here, I think it's useful to read quickly, to make notations in the margins about various objections. With regard to question 1, the question that provokes the answer that is the subject of essay question 1, are you acquainted with the defendant Dave? Yes, we've been selling cocaine together for years. Well, yes is responsive, but the rest of the answer is non-responsive. The second question is dealing with an answer to the follow-up question. On May 30 at 7 o'clock, where were you? Answer, I got home at 7. When I got there, I found a message. Again, partially non-responsive, at least partially. Then the third question, what message had Dave left for you? And we get an answer. The question is what the objections will be, and hearsay is a likely answer. Skimming down to question 4, we are focusing on a question from the prosecutor. At that point, after you are asked to cooperate with the government, did you plead guilty to possession and agree to testify truthfully? Answer yes. Well, we will focus on the fourth call of the question. It looks like it is a compound and a leading question, and it doesn't look as if we are dealing with an adverse questioner. So those are the questions raised here. The fifth call is an interesting and a novel situation. Here the question is, was your testimony there the same as here today? Well, that's improper bolstering. This witness has yet to be questioned with regard to any variations on the testimony, so trying to bolster testimony that has not yet been challenged is error. Next we turn to cross-examination. Here leading questions are okay, and the first question is just such a question. It's a leading question, and it's also focusing on a 3-year-old conviction for criminal assault. We wonder, was that a felony or a misdemeanor? And then we turn to the seventh question, and that's about a cross-examination question. And you told your probation officer last week that you haven't done anything illegal since 1994. Well, here again we're focusing on a hearsay issue and also a character issue. Please turn and have a look at my outline of issues, and these are the same headings that I use in the answer. You'll see I raise the objections and I answer the question with regard to admissibility. I think this clerical work up front makes writing the answer a lot easier, and it also makes it a lot easier to read. The better organized your thinking is on any question, the better your answer is likely to be. On a racehorse question like any evidence transcript question, and most non-transcript evidence questions, being well organized is essential to success. So have a look at the 7 Roman numerals. You'll notice that there's no internal organization for any of them. The different objections constitute the organization, and as we look at my answer, you'll see that I've organized the facts quite rigorously, and I found a home for the details, including the ones that are related to the transcript. So now turn to the answer. Let's have a brief look at that document. Here I think you'll see that mostly what is being presented is factual analysis in the context of objections. Certainly you're not going to see any boilerplate definitions in this answer. And what little definitions I do provide are going to be about as stripped down as you will see anywhere in model answers that I present for your consideration. So we look at the answer. The first objection that we are making, or the first item that we're commenting on, there's a non-responsive objection and the character objection. I have a separate internal heading for each one. The non-responsive aspect of the answer is simple, and anything beyond yes or no is non-responsive and will be stricken. But the character issue is actually quite a typical one raised on transcript and non-transcript evidence questions. Here, Carl is testifying about prior cocaine sales by Dave, and that's objectionable as improper character evidence. And the problem is that so-called mimic rule. The testimony being offered by Carl shows Dave's motive and his intent. And although it is highly prejudicial, it also is admissible over a character evidence objection. Next, we turn to the second item that we're supposed to raise objections to. Here, the prosecutor is asking Carl where he was at 7 o'clock on the evening of the crime. It's another relevant preliminary question, and the witness testified that he got home at about 7 and found a message on his answering machine. So here again, the witness is going beyond what the question has called for, and so it is non-responsive in that part. It is true that Carl will be able to testify that he had received a message from Dave on the evening in question. There would have to be a proper foundation, a proper question asked. Since Carl has known Dave for a long time, he'd be able to recognize the voice, and then the testimony is admissible. Then we turn to the third item. Here the prosecutor is asking the witness what message had been left. This is obviously a hearsay problem initially. It is an out-of-court statement being offered for its truth, and here the content of the message is also significant because the message is about a customer who wants to buy a substantial amount of cocaine, 1 kilo. And this message would be considered an admission and thus non-hearsay. So a hearsay objection would be overruled, and then we turn to authentication and best evidence objections. Here we've got testimony being offered about a recording. Why not just bring the recording itself in? There's no reason given to us under the facts as to why that couldn't be done. So I sustain the best evidence and authentication objections. We turn next to the question asked Carl by the prosecutor about his guilty plea for cocaine possession and his promise to testify truthfully. Here the problem, initially, is it's a compound question. We ought to split the question up into its two parts and then allow each part to be asked or objected to separately. Also, the prosecutor's question is leading because all the answers are contained in the question. And for a direct examination question that is not about some preliminary issue, we have an objection sustained there as well. And then, finally, this question assumes facts that aren't yet in evidence because Carl hasn't testified that he was asked to cooperate with the government or plead guilty or agree to testify, although those facts are all in the first part of the question. We'd sustain this objection too. And I suggest that this set here, item number 4, is well worth your study. This is a fairly subtle response, and it's also quite a detailed response. They're asking for objections. We're giving them as many objections as we can come up with. And here, this is rather subtle, if I do say so myself. Have a look and see if you don't agree that there's a couple of lessons to be learned from that analysis. Next, we turn to item 5, where the prosecutor is asking the witness, Carl, if his grand jury testimony was the same as his current testimony at trial. Here we've got a hearsay objection, which probably would be sustained because there's no exception that would justify admitting it. Plus, this, as I indicated upon our first read, this is an improper bolstering issue. There hasn't been any cross-examination of this witness yet to call the truthfulness of this testimony into question. So it would be inappropriate to try to bolster it now. Let's wait until the defense has had its chance to make this witness look bad, and then maybe we can try to bolster that testimony and see if we can figure a way around the hearsay issue. Next, in item 6, the defense is now asking questions. And here, the defense is asking the witness, Carl, if he's the same Carl Smith who was convicted of criminal assault. It's a leading question, and that's the first objection. But leading questions are permissible on cross-examination. We are dealing with a character evidence problem here, really, and felony convictions within the last 10 years are admissible, as well as misdemeanor convictions involving moral turpitude. Okay, there's a little bit of law for you to chew on. Mostly we're dealing with legal and factual analysis, but in this case we really do need to get this black-letter law rule into the answer. Typically, criminal assault is a misdemeanor, and it doesn't involve dishonesty even at the felony level. So an objection probably would be sustained unless it turns out this is a felony. And in our last item, the defense is asking the witness if he had told his probation officer that he hadn't done anything illegal since 1994. Several years. It's relevant because it tends to undermine all the witness's testimony. And although the question does make reference to an out-of-court statement, it is not seeking to establish the truth of the statement. If anything, it is implying that the statement is a lie. Thus, it would be a prior inconsistent statement offered to impeach, and the hearsay objection would be overruled. Next, we focus on a character objection raised by the prosecution because it deals with prior bad acts. Also, once again, this objection would be overruled because the question is relevant to the truthfulness of the testimony being offered by Carl, and as a result, the character evidence objection would be overruled. So that wraps up a consideration of a typically elaborate and complicated transcript evidence fact pattern. It was well worth our review because it gives us one or two issues that have not been tested rigorously very often and which are fair game and could be on your bar exam.